Diversity needs a spark, and that spark is inclusion. Today's business climate looks to embrace the idea that a more diverse workforce is a good thing, one that should be promoted, encouraged, developed, and explored. In larger organizations, along with the traditional role of VP of HR or CHRO, a VP of Diversity and Inclusion or Chief Diversity Officer often sits as well, confirming the increasing significance of this area of workforce development. The move towards embracing diversity has been a long time coming, but it's certainly here. Diversity without inclusion, however, is an empty promise. And benefiting from a diverse workforce is often not achieved. A workforce of diverse backgrounds, genders, ethnicities, and communication styles simply achieves, well, just that. It's a room, a building, a company with diversity in it, but not necessarily extracting the performance benefits of diversity out of it. It's only when the organization, its leaders, its teams, and its culture embrace a culture of inclusion that the business benefits of diversity can be enjoyed. It's inclusion that is the spark for diversity. At Lead Inclusively, we help develop inclusive organizations so that the promise of diversity has the resounding impact on business performance we're all looking for: the recruitment, retention, and advancement of a diverse workforce, increased innovation and employee engagement, and better business performance year on year. All of our work is metric-driven, and companies across the world have already experienced the depth and wealth of benefits resulting from our work. To get business performance from diversity, you need the spark of inclusion. To build inclusive leaders, you need Lead Inclusively.
Hello, everyone. It's Rhett Power. It's Lunchtimes Live on LinkedIn. And now we have rebranded the show. This is the last Lunchtimes on LinkedIn Live because last week, if you watched the show with David Breyer, we did some on-air live coaching and rebranding of the show right then and there with one of the top branders in the world. So next week, it's going to be called Power Lunch Live. We've got the new website. That's actually live now, powerlunch.live. And it's got all of the upcoming shows. It's got the calendar, the schedule. And so you can go on that and find out who's coming up. We do have a great lineup coming up in the next few weeks. Next week, we've got Dr. Lance Secretan, who is just a world-renowned coach. We're going to be talking about his new book, The Bellwether Effect. And we do the show every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We try to do it at 12 noon. Sometimes the technology gods and karma or whatever it is gets in the way, and sometimes we push it a little bit. But anyway, we try to do it around 12 noon every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. The point of the show is to talk to the day's thought leaders, best-selling authors, CEOs, corporate leaders, people who are doing good stuff in the world. We want to learn their secrets to success. We want to learn what drives them so that we can all be better. Now, the fun part is that this show is interactive if you ask questions. So you have to ask questions. And I know Denise and I and our teams will be around to answer these questions during the show and after the show. So if you have a question on LinkedIn, we can most certainly answer it. This show is also simulcast on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube with the help of Social Live's platform. So if you like the program, please like or share it so that we can spread the word. Today, we always have some of the best people, some of the best thought leaders, as I was saying. Today is no different. I've got a good friend, Denise Hummel. Denise is a world leader in diversity and inclusion. She's a world-renowned leader in this field. She is the CEO of Lead Inclusively, a firm that helps companies use diversity and inclusion as an accelerator for innovation. She is author of Diversity and Inclusion and Culture Integration. She's an entrepreneur, a great entrepreneur, in fact, a lawyer, and she's also a Marshall Goldsmith 100 coach. Denise, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
Well, Sorry to get you up so early. I know you're on the West Coast, so it's not lunchtime quite for you. So I appreciate all of that. I want to, we want to talk about diversity and inclusion today, and that's the whole point of the show. And I want to sort of get your take on where we are. But why have you made this your life's work?
It's so interesting. I've always been fascinated by the differences in others. Mm-hmm. And I had very little choice of how to approach that initially, because my dad gave me two choices. He said I could be a doctor or a lawyer. And since I wasn't very good at math and science, I had no choice but to approach this through the law. So I actually started my career as an international employment lawyer, but focusing on employment discrimination on both sides of the field. I started actually as plaintiff, and then after a while started working in corporate America as well. But I was the attorney who tried and won the first class action under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And of course, that made me the de facto expert in that area. You know how lawyers are. Once you do one thing like that, now all of a sudden you're, you
get this landmark case
exactly.
that you win. Right.
But to be honest with you, I started to get burned out on that, because I felt like I was more a part of the problem than the solution. And I really wanted a way to leverage diversity for good, for opportunity, and not look at it as a compliance issue, which is the way we were looking at it way back when.
Well, that's a great segue. Can you talk about where we are today? I mean, from the 1960s, when we were talking about, like you said, in the terms of compliance, right?
Right.
Now we're talking about it in terms of performance, thanks to you and your company and a lot of the work that you've been doing. Talk about that sort of evolution and that history a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
that's really important to what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, Rhett. I mean, when you think about it, the Civil Rights Act, the initial Civil Rights Act was in the 60s, and then it was amended in the 90s. But I mean, remember that we started with these roots that were really kind of hard to believe now. We had people of color being marginalized, not only slavery, but post-slavery, Jim Crow laws, straight through the 60s and even 70s. We had legislated discrimination, not, separate but equal. We forget that that's not that long ago. And women, similar kinds of oppression, not being able to sign checks without their husbands if they were married, not being able to sign contracts, being kept out of the workforce, equal pay problems even till today. So it's no wonder that we started to move from legislated discrimination to legislated equality. When people think about affirmative action, then, a little bit further down the road, but still compliance and trying to undo some of the discrimination that was done. But still, it's all with an eye towards let's try to get people where they belong, which is equal, which is how we should have started to begin with, right? So it's no wonder that a lot of companies, particularly very traditional sort of older companies, are still there. They may still be really focused on compliance. Let's not get sued. Let's not be on the wrong end of the Me Too issues, et cetera. And I get that, and it's important. I'm not trying to minimize it in any way. But the piece of that gets lost is that diversity is actually the number one driver of innovation. If you don't have innovative thought, if you don't have diverse ideation, you don't have innovation. And if you have a corporation that is unable to include those people, to have an inclusive culture, those diverse people then do not have a voice. And when they don't have a voice, they come to the table to get their paycheck, not because they're invested in the outcome. So there's the opportunity right there, right?
Well, so we often lump, as you were just talking about that, it occurred to me, we often lump, and you made a distinction there that I want you to highlight a little bit, because we often lump diversity and inclusion. I mean, that's it's two words, but it's
peanut butter and jelly.
Right. It's lumped together, right? Exactly. But it's different. I mean, they're very different concepts. I mean, what is I mean, can you explain that difference? Because I want people to be very clear that diversity and inclusion are two different things, but they go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's so true. I mean, we just see it as this colloquialism, or the buzzword, but there is a very important distinction. Diversity is just that. It's the diversity of people. It's, do you have a mix of people in the workplace, men, women, people of color, cognitive diversity, communication style diversity, all just diversity in general. Some of that, of course, is legislated and demographic, but some of that is just the different ways, belief systems, just a nice healthy mix of people. That's diversity. The inclusion component of it is how those people feel when they get there. Now, in a work setting, of course, I'm talking in a work setting. So it's the belonging piece. It's is everyone empowered the same way? Do I feel, as a woman, for example, because obviously I identify as a woman, do I feel that my thoughts and my contribution is as valued as everyone else? Do I have the same opportunities? Am I exposed to the same people, the important clients, let's say, or customers? And am I invited to the right meetings? Am I treated in some way differently because I'm a woman? And this is, traditionally what happens, Rhett, is that you'll see a lot of diversity at the lower levels of an organization. In fact, when I speak to millennials, they'll often say, "What are you guys talking about? There's no problem here."
Great, right.
And there is no problem often at the bottom. What happens is, as you come up through middle management, that talent pool goes from this and starts narrowing and narrowing and narrowing until, when we get to senior leadership and the C-suite, we're down to, less than 10%. So that's what we're trying to avoid. It's not just about recruiting diverse people. The inclusion piece of that is, can we retain them and can we advance them to senior leadership where they become the faces of leadership of the future? Make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I guess that two questions that sort of come out of that, that funnel that you're talking about into the C-suite or into senior management, is that the result of I don't think it's intentional bias, right? But I've been fascinated recently by, and because of you, thank you, because of unconscious bias.
Right.
And to me, that seems like that's part of that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, what are some things that, when you talk about inclusive behaviors, inclusive environments, what are some things that people can do to make an environment inclusive? So I know those are two big questions, but.
Great questions. I mean, the reality is the majority of leaders, they want to be inclusive, right? Most of us.
Right.
We want to be accepting. We want to be even curious about the differences in others. But we all have unconscious bias, every single one of us. I mean, the neuroscience is very clear on this issue. If you have a brain, you have bias. That's it. My bias could be different than your bias. I used to hate tattoos, and I would have to be conscious of, when I go into an interview and I see a tattoo, I would say, "Denise, you are a diversity and inclusion person. Inclusivity means you don't look at that tattoo, you listen to what that person is saying, and you make your decision based on who this person is." Of course, it helps that both my kids have tattoos now, so what goes around comes around. But the issue is we all have unconscious bias. The problem is, and like any professional, or at least one who has entrepreneurial vision, you have to learn from your mistakes. So initially, way back when I started this journey, we were all about unconscious bias awareness training. We've got to elevate awareness. And
right.
Okay, so what did we get? Sometimes we got aware leaders, and sometimes it backfired. But either way, it didn't lead to inclusive behaviors. And the reason is, you can't just elevate awareness. You have to be able to tell leaders, to demonstrate to them what inclusive behaviors are, what they look like in the workplace, how to use them and practice them, and you have to have a means to sustain that. So unconscious bias is, awareness, training is important, but the next gen of this, learning from the mistakes of the past, is moving from unconscious bias to inclusive behaviors. And so all of our assessments, training, everything that we do revolves around that.
Okay. So what are some of those tips? I mean, maybe we can cover this a little bit, but how do you create an inclusive environment? Let's say I'm a small business or a medium-sized business, and I'm really conscious about this, and what are some simple things that people can do to create that environment, office environment, that business environment that's inclusive?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, it depends on the organization, the size of the organization, the maturity model of the organization in terms of where they are on this journey, right? So we have different solutions that are associated with different kinds of firms. There are some firms that need a really high touch interaction. And so with those firms, we're consulting with them, right? We're helping them with their diversity and inclusion strategy and the best way to get some momentum.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the high visibility, high touch approach. But then we also have some companies that are really, they've got a lot of systems in place. They've got consulting related to recruiting, retention, advancement, how to basically stop that leaky pipeline. But what they need is more of some self-guided solutions. And for them, we have e-learning so that they can embed inclusive behaviors in every aspect of the business. And we call that training from unconscious bias to inclusive behavior. So it's got the unconscious bias part of it, but then the inclusive behaviors part of it, very interactive, sort of thing. And then the last piece of this, the sustainability piece, and this is actually applicable for all businesses. But as you probably know, Rhett, we're in development on what we're calling an inclusion virtual coach app, that will keep inclusive behaviors top of mind for leaders in real time based on their focuses when they're dealing with it, and kind of serve it up to them in such a way that they can embed inclusion in their team in kind of these microbursts, the way we're all wanting to learn nowadays. So it really comes down to evaluating where the company is and what their needs are, right? It's not about what we have to give. It's about where they are and what they need.
Right. All right. Well, we're going to come back to that app, because I think that's one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you today, because I think it, as we were discussing, it's AI for good, right? I want you to talk about that a little bit, and how that app is going to really, really help companies, do this better. But I want to ask you though, what are some of the mistakes that you see when companies are trying to implement these programs? What are some of the mistakes that they typically make?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Rhett. And of course they're well-meaning, right? So most companies, I would say, if I had to say just one thing, it would be that they don't have a strategic approach. So they will say, we've got to do something about this diversity and inclusion thing. What can we do? That will have an impact. Let's start an employee resource group. We'll do, people of color day, or we'll do, what they call an ERG for women. Or let's do it. Let's have the CEO do a video, or sign something, or put something on the website. And all of that is absolutely well-meaning, but it's not calculated to yield a specific result. So the biggest mistake they make is not asking themselves, what problem are we solving for? Are we not able to recruit enough, let's say, I'm just going to use women and people of color. Is that the issue? Are we good at that, but we can't retain them? Are we not advancing them to senior places of leadership? Are we getting Glassdoor complaints that say that this is not a culture of belonging? So first, find out what are you solving for, and then work backwards strategically. So the second problem is that there isn't a strategic approach. So know what you're fixing and then be strategic in your approach, because I can guarantee that these one and done sort of things, even if it's training, even if it's good training, is never going to lead to culture transformation. Culture transformation is hard. It's extremely difficult, and it requires a very calculated and sustainable, strategic plan. And that's what we help clients with, because let's face it, their business plan is to reach their revenue numbers, to reach their mission, and to do it within, the values of whatever that culture is. They're not in the business of diversity and inclusion. So that's where we come in, of course, because this is what we live and breathe every day.
Right. It can't be just one tactic, right? It can't be just one-off thing isn't going to solve the issue. It's got to be a holistic approach to it, and a strategic approach to it. And that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly right.
So I guess that would lead to another question in terms of, how do you come in and assess, like when you come into a company, what is your process to sort of, do you go from the ground up, or do you top down? How do you work in a company? How do you sort of go in and analyze what the issues are and the approach that's the best approach? Is it, I'm just kind of fascinated about what your approach is in terms of that.
Yeah, great question. I mean, we really, we like to start with an organizational assessment. We have a pretty robust assessment where we go in, we ask some very, very specific questions from 8 different areas of the organization, from leadership and accountability through what the board is doing, to learning and development, to marketing. Just every aspect of the business, to really get an idea whether the organization is aligned, and if not, what are they doing well, and what and where are the gaps. So that's what we start with, and then we meet with leadership and we say, here's what we see, here's what we can build on, and here are the gaps. And we help leadership to understand, basically to get buy-in and to help them to see the opportunity, because these numbers are real. Organizations that are led inclusively are more innovative, their employee engagement is higher, their productivity is higher, their revenue numbers are higher. So if we can...
Is there some research? Because I know there's probably some research.
Oh yeah. And we have an entire business case deck associated with this. So if any of your listeners want that, they just literally, they can just, info@leadinclusively.com, and I will authorize them to get the business deck with all the stats in it. It'll blow you away. Is
that something you could put online after
yes.
on a LinkedIn link to it from?
Well, I don't know, but at a minimum, we can give them info and your listeners specifically will get it. I don't know that I can offer it to the whole.
Fair enough. I didn't know if it was something that you could or couldn't. But I think that some of those numbers are really, really powerful in terms of even if you weren't doing it for the right reasons, there's a business reason to do
it for the business. You know what? We're sort of, in society at this point, we're really, yes, we all want to play well in the sandbox, and equity is critically important. But to get the attention of senior leaders, which is what we need to get the resources to get this done, they've got to see how this impacts the bottom line, right?
Right.
They've got to see how it can be calculated to lead to increased revenue, or at a minimum reduce costly attrition, or otherwise why do they need to focus on it? They are busy, they are overwhelmed, they're putting in 16-hour days. You have to show them a reason for this to be real.
Right. Well, and it to me, looking at some of the numbers that I've seen, I don't know why you wouldn't do this, and I don't know that you'll survive if you don't do this.
I agree. I mean, it is so competitive for key talent out there right now, number one. And number two, you're absolutely right. I mean, the statistics, again, are overwhelming that the companies that are inclusive do better. Period. End of story. Gen Y and Gen Z are not putting up with this sort of thing. They have to feel engaged in order to do well, or they're going to move on. It's a mobile society We are not, we are not the people that stay in one job for 10 or 20 years. Far from it. We're looking to have, I'm putting myself in the category of a Gen Y or a Gen Z apparently, but I see it. People want to feel like they're part of something that is really meaningful and where they feel good to go to work every day.
Yeah, and I think that looking at it from a business standpoint too, I do a lot of consulting with small and medium enterprises, and the level, even 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, the playing field is level now in terms of the data that we have access to, and the technology, and it's just moving so much faster, and the competitive landscape is pretty even. Everybody's got the same technology. So what do you do to differentiate yourself, right?
Everybody doesn't have the same technology. I'll tell you that right now, having spent the past, I don't know how long, like my entire waking moment is based on decisions associated with this app. So I know that not everyone has the technology to make this happen. But I get your point. I get it.
Well, you can have access to stuff now that you didn't have access to. Yeah. But my point is, from a business standpoint, the level of the playing field is a lot more level than it used to be.
Yeah, very true.
So this is one way to really differentiate yourself.
You're absolutely right.
Let's go to the app, because I think the app, you and I had a great conversation a couple of weeks ago about AI for good, and I think that this app is fascinating. Talk to us about that, and talk to us about the vision behind this app and what it's going to do in terms of making being able to scale your business, and actually just really provide a real value and a real service for the companies that you're working with and that are using this technology.
And ironically, Rhett, the patent literally was just filed today, or I probably couldn't talk about it. But so I'll start by saying this. We started as a consulting company, plain and simple, live workshops, hand evaluated assessments, both for the organization as well as for the leader. And we realized, this is never going to be scalable. We need to figure this out. So we had two big successes. One, our organizational assessment, I have to admit, we still do by hand because we still feel that we need that high touch. But for our leadership assessment, which focuses on the intersection between inclusive behaviors and innovation behaviors, because that's the key intersection we found is really worth focusing on, that assessment is now completely digital and is the leader gets an automated findings and recommendations report and action plan when he or she presses the finish button. So it takes 10 minutes to do. It's a self-evaluation. And the second they press finish, they get something that's actionable. And that was such a win. And then we took our most our most impactful live program from unconscious bias to inclusive leadership, and we made that an e-learning, interactive, micro modules, etc. And we were really proud of that. We felt like we had solved just about every problem except for one. We were still unable to make that learning sticky and to make the behavior change that leaders were aware of and maybe even practicing sustainable. And we knew
habit, right? And make it a habit.
Exactly. It's like anything. It's like anything you're trying to do or change. I don't care if it's a diet or whatever. And in this particular case, if you're not making leadership behaviors sustainable, inclusive behaviors sustainable, then that organizational transformation is literally impossible. And we had to solve for that. And so we decided to design an inclusion behavior virtual coach app, as I mentioned before. And it's actually tied into real-time moments. It delivers micro-learning when the leader needs it based on his or her focuses and choices. It uses nudge messaging. It uses AI. The app gets smarter and smarter as it learns the leader. And I probably can't tell you a lot more about it now because just because of the timing of it. But we have a client that has believed so strongly in it. They actually funded the entire development of it in exchange to be first to market. Thank you if you're out there listening to this. And so our dream is coming true. And that truly is the last piece of the puzzle. And I kind of feel like it's my legacy.
Yeah, I see the smile on your face, but what's an example of it? So like you said, it nudges you. So can you give me an example of when it might nudge me?
Yeah, I mean, it nudges you as you're going in a meeting to remind you to lead inclusively and to give you tips and tricks on how to do that as you're walking into the meeting. Same with performance evaluation. I mean, we basically have identified the 5 areas of a leader's responsibilities where inclusion can be embedded, and we have laser focused on them.
So it can remind me to say thank you at the end of the day, or it can remind me of like when somebody's birthday is, and then say, hey.
Well, I don't know about the birthday part, but it can. You just gave me an idea, Rhett. Maybe I need to bring that to the development team.
Yeah. Can it really remind me of when?
I like what you're thinking.
Because part of that is like recognizing my team, being just conscious of my team, right? And being
yeah. I mean, these are more general skills that will impact everyone. Like remember to open a meeting inclusively. Remember to listen for the quieter voices. I mean, sometimes as leaders, part of the problem is that when there isn't inclusion or when there's exclusion, and it could be, by the way, just because of personality style. It could be introvert, extrovert, cognitive diversity, or communication diversity. It doesn't have to be demographic diversity. But oftentimes the people that are not, included are those who are actually not speaking up. So being aware of the quieter voices and how to bring them out is an important leadership skill. And getting those tips right before you walk in where they become real is important, right? When we moved to Italy, my kids were young, and we tried to teach them Italian before we went, and they would have nothing to do with it. They went to classes every Sunday, they learned almost nothing. But the second they got to Italy and they couldn't ask for an ice cream or where the restroom was, you better believe that they started learning the language quickly. So learning and sustainability has to be about real time and about relevance and about being a help to these leaders and not just one more thing to do. And that we realized.
What how is this going to help you scale? Like, how will this help you grow?
Gosh, I mean, we can now serve. I mean, the app was built non-ethnocentrically, so we can now serve the world, basically. Not that we couldn't do that before. The assessments that I described and the e-learning that I described are totally scalable too. But this last piece of the puzzle, everybody's been grappling with this. It's not just us. It's all of enterprise. Any diversity and inclusion professional that that's been doing this work for a while will tell you that this has been the thorniest issue, period, bar none.
So is it something that you could use across a company? So at every level of management, every leader in the company, it's designed for that in that way, right?
Yeah, it's designed for anyone who manages people, although that's, version 1, version 2 is going to include everyone, basically. It's going to be designed for everyone. And there's a portion of the program that is applicable to everyone. So we could actually launch that immediately afterwards. I don't know that we will. Right now, we do want to focus on leaders because they have the most impact on organizational transformation.
Well, I would say that, the e-learning was very easy, and it was very, very, it was very simple and but very informative. So I thought that was those were really good modules, but I can see where this app is going to be really that last piece. I get it now. I get how that's going to be that last piece. This has been great. What, if you just had to leave one nugget of wisdom, one one thing to say to the audience about diversity and inclusion, and what is, for you, what is something you really want to leave with companies when they think about this? What's that one thing?
Just to be open to new solutions, to not be afraid to have difficult conversations. This work is all about being uncomfortable. It's all about being humble. It's all about learning from our mistakes. Don't get discouraged if you have a certain remit or accountability and it hasn't gone well. Reach out and get what you need, and fail fast and move on. It's not about winning all the time. It's about fearlessly testing hypotheses and looking for next practices and not relying on historic best practices that simply haven't worked. Well,
this has been great. This is a great conversation, and I think it won't be the last one that we have, because I think that I think having this conversation every once in a while and seeing where you've progressed and sort of the data and the things that you're collecting, and as this gets better and better, I certainly want to have you back to talk about that and to see how that's going and what you've learned and how that technology is even getting better. But thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're in the middle of all this rollout and getting this ready to go, so I really do appreciate the time.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. This has been so much fun. Let's do it again, definitely.
Well, I look forward to it. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Lunchtimes on LinkedIn Live, and next week it will be a new show, same kind of show, but just a new name. We've got a great lineup next week, and also, if you want us to come to your conference, if you want us to do a live broadcast from your event or your conference, please do reach out to us through the website. And it's been a great pleasure to have you, Denise. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you where they can find Lead Inclusively and your business and your practice.
So the website is, as you might imagine, leadinclusively.com, and to reach us, info@leadinclusively.com. And we're happy to engage in any conversation you'd like.
Right, and you also do a lot of speaking and a lot of training, so that's part of what you can do, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, good. Well, get in touch with her, because she is the person to help you get through these issues. And again, thank